Hello, and welcome to today's debate between Simone de Beauvoir and Catherine Malabou on the subject Radical Change Requires Breaking with Existing Structures, Not Transforming Them from Within. This is an AI-generated podcast based directly on the writings of Simone de Beauvoir and Catherine Malabou. It is intended as a fun and interesting way to learn about some of the main arguments of prominent French philosophers. As always, AI can make mistakes, so don't rely on this debate as your only source of what Simone de Beauvoir's and Catherine Malabou's views. With those opening remarks out of the way, let's move to today's main event, the debate itself. Each philosopher will give an opening statement and their main arguments, followed by rebuttals, after which we will hear closing statements. I invite Simone de Beauvoir to speak first, please.
The notion that radical change requires breaking with existing structures, not transforming them from within, is a simplistic and misleading one. As I've argued in my seminal work, The Ethics of Ambiguity, human existence is characterized by its inherent ambiguity. We are simultaneously free and constrained, individual and social, autonomous and dependent. This ambiguity is precisely what makes it impossible to simply break with existing structures. Our existence is always already embedded within a web of relationships, institutions, and power dynamics that shape our choices and actions. To think that we can simply opt out of these structures or demolish them from the outside is to ignore the complex interplay between individual agency and social context. In my book, The Second Sex, I demonstrated how women's lives are shaped by a complex array of social, cultural, and economic factors that cannot be reduced to simple oppositions between freedom and oppression. Women's experiences are characterized by a perpetual negotiation between their own desires and aspirations, on the one hand, and the societal expectations and norms that constrain them, on the other. This negotiation is not unique to women, however. All individuals must navigate this complex interplay between personal agency and social context in order to effect meaningful change. To assume that we can simply break with existing structures ignores the ways in which our own identities and interests are already entwined with those of others. Moreover, transforming existing structures from within is not a naive or reformist approach, as some might claim. Rather, it acknowledges the complexity and multiplicity of human existence. As I argued in The Ethics of Ambiguity, authentic freedom can only be achieved through a nuanced understanding of our own situatedness within the world. This means recognizing that change is always already underway. Existing structures are constantly evolving, adapting to new circumstances and challenges. Our task, then, is not to break with these structures, but to engage with them in a way that fosters meaningful transformation. In fact, I would argue that it is precisely this kind of engagement that has led to some of the most significant social changes throughout history, from the civil rights movement to feminist struggles for equality. These movements did not arise from outside existing structures, but rather emerged through the collective efforts of individuals and groups working within those structures to challenge and transform them. In conclusion, the idea that radical change requires breaking with existing structures is a misleading one. Rather, meaningful transformation arises from a nuanced understanding of our own situatedness within the world and a willingness to engage with existing structures in a way that fosters authentic freedom and collective empowerment. As I've argued throughout my work, it is only through this kind of engagement that we can create a more just and equitable society, not by breaking with existing structures, but by transforming them from within.
Thank you, Simone de Beauvoir, for that opening statement and arguments. I now invite Catherine Malabou to address the audience for your opening statement and your main arguments.
The notion that radical change can be achieved by transforming existing structures from within is a comforting but ultimately misguided idea. As I've argued in my book, What Should We Do with Our Brain? Our brains, and by extension, our societies, are shaped by the very structures we seek to transform. This means that any attempt to reform these structures from within will inevitably be limited by the constraints of those same structures. In other words, the existing power dynamics, social norms, and institutional frameworks will always tend to reabsorb and neutralize any attempts at transformation, rendering them ineffective or even counterproductive. This is because these structures are not just external constraints, but also shape our very thoughts, desires, and behaviors. For instance, in my work, The New Wounded, I've shown how the dominant ideologies of neoliberalism and biopolitics have insidiously shaped our understanding of ourselves, our relationships, and our place within society. These ideologies have created a regime of self-governance, where individuals are expected to take responsibility for their own lives, health, and well-being, thereby obscuring the role of systemic injustices and power imbalances. In such a context, any attempt to transform these structures from within will only serve to reinforce the existing order. This is why I argue that radical change requires breaking with existing structures, rather than trying to reform them. By breaking with these structures, we can create new possibilities for thought, action, and being that are not predetermined by the dominant ideologies. This is not a call for destruction or chaos, but rather a recognition of the need for a fundamental rupture with the existing order. As I've argued in Plasticity at the Dusk of Writing, this rupture can be achieved through a process of creative experimentation, where new forms of thought, art, and politics are invented. In conclusion, transforming existing structures from within is not enough to bring about radical change. Instead, we need to break with these structures and create new possibilities for thought and action that are not constrained by the dominant ideologies. This requires a fundamental rethinking of our assumptions about power, subjectivity, and social change. As I've argued throughout my work, it is only through this kind of rupture that we can create a truly different future, one that is not predetermined by the existing structures, but instead opens up new possibilities for human flourishing.
We now move to the rebuttals. Simone de Beauvoir will speak first.
I strongly disagree with Catherine Malabou's assertion that radical change requires breaking with existing structures. While I understand her frustration with the limitations of reform, I believe she underestimates the potential for transformation from within. Malabou argues that our thoughts and behaviors are shaped by dominant ideologies, making it impossible to transform these structures from within. However, this perspective overlooks the complex interplay between individual agency and structural constraints. As I argued in The Ethics of Ambiguity, human beings have the capacity to choose their own path, even within limiting circumstances. Furthermore, Malabou's call for a fundamental rupture with existing structures ignores the importance of gradual, incremental change. In my work, The Second Sex, I highlighted the ways in which women's lives are shaped by patriarchal norms and institutions. However, I also emphasized the need for collective action and solidarity to challenge these structures. Breaking with existing structures might be a necessary step in some cases, but it is not the only path to radical change. In many instances, transformation can occur through a process of gradual subversion from within. This approach recognizes that individuals are already embedded within power structures and seeks to exploit the contradictions and ambiguities within these systems. Malabou's emphasis on creative experimentation is intriguing, but I worry that this approach might lead to a lack of engagement with existing social and political institutions. As I argued in The Mandarins, intellectuals have a responsibility to engage with the world as it is, rather than retreating into abstract speculation. In conclusion, while I share Malabou's desire for radical change, I believe that transformation from within is not only possible, but also necessary. By recognizing the complex interplay between individual agency and structural constraints, we can work towards gradual, incremental change that challenges existing power structures without abandoning them entirely.
It is now time for Catherine Malabou's rebuttal.
Simone de Beauvoir's response highlights the tension between our philosophical perspectives. While I respect her emphasis on individual agency and gradual change, I strongly disagree with her assessment of my argument. De Beauvoir claims that I underestimate the potential for transformation from within existing structures. However, this misreads my position. I'm not suggesting that individuals are completely determined by dominant ideologies. Rather, I argue that these ideologies shape our understanding of ourselves and the world in profound ways. Moreover, de Beauvoir's appeal to gradual, incremental change strikes me as overly optimistic. In many cases, existing power structures are so entrenched that they resist even the most well-intentioned reforms. This is why I advocate for a more radical rupture with these structures, not as an end in itself, but as a necessary step towards creating new possibilities. De Beauvoir's reference to my emphasis on creative experimentation also misses the mark. Experimentation isn't about abandoning engagement with existing institutions. Rather, it's about imagining and testing new forms of life, sociality, and politics that can challenge these institutions from without. Furthermore, de Beauvoir's invocation of her own work on the second sex is instructive. While she's right to highlight the importance of collective action and solidarity in challenging patriarchal norms, I'd argue that this very example illustrates the limitations of working within existing structures. The women's movement has made significant gains, but it's also been co-opted and assimilated into mainstream politics in ways that reinforce existing power dynamics. Ultimately, my call for a radical rupture with existing structures isn't about dismissing the importance of individual agency or collective action. Rather, it's about recognizing that sometimes more is needed to bring about genuine transformation.
The time has come for closing statements. Simone de Beauvoir, the floor is yours.
As we conclude this debate, I want to emphasize that Catherine's call for radical rupture is not only unrealistic, but also irresponsible. By advocating for a complete break with existing structures, she ignores the complexity of human experience and the slow, laborious process of transformation. I'm not naive about the power dynamics at play, nor do I underestimate the entrenched nature of oppressive systems. But what Catherine fails to see is that these systems are made up of individuals with their own agency and capacity for change. Transforming from within doesn't mean accepting the status quo. It means working with others to create a new reality. It's about leveraging our shared humanity to challenge existing power structures and build something better. This isn't incrementalism, this is revolution by 1,000 cuts. Catherine's vision of radical rupture risks abandoning those who are most vulnerable, leaving them to face the consequences alone. My approach, on the other hand, offers a more inclusive, compassionate path forward, one that recognizes our shared responsibility for creating change and works towards a world where everyone has the chance to thrive. I urge you all to consider, what kind of revolution do we want? One that abandons the most vulnerable, or one that lifts us all up together? The choice is ours.
And I now invite you, Catherine Malabou, to give your closing statement.
As we conclude this debate, I want to drive home a crucial point. Transformation from within is not only insufficient, but also complicit in the perpetuation of oppressive systems. Simone's approach assumes that existing structures can be reformed, that they have an inherent capacity for self-transformation. But what if these structures are fundamentally designed to maintain power and control? What if their very essence is resistance to change? We cannot underestimate the extent to which our institutions, language, and even our thoughts are embedded in a logic of domination. To transform from within means to accept this logic, to work within its constraints, and ultimately to reinforce it. Radical rupture, on the other hand, is not about abandoning those who are most vulnerable. It's about recognizing that they are precisely the ones who have been most brutally exploited by existing structures. It's about acknowledging that our current systems of thought and organization are unsustainable and must be fundamentally overhauled. Simone speaks of compassion and shared humanity, but I say, true compassion requires a willingness to disrupt the status quo, to break free from the suffocating grip of what is. Only then can we create something new, something truly just and equal for all.
Thank you to Simone de Beauvoir and Catherine Malabou for participating in this debate on the subject, radical change requires breaking with existing structures, not transforming them from within. I trust that listeners will have found this respectful exchange of ideas to be thought-provoking and useful. Please come back again to hear another French philosophical debate, or check out our brief, reflective reaction to the day's news in the French Philosophers React podcast. See you next time.